This episode of Local Film Talk was recorded in the Green Room at Natty Green's in downtown Raleigh. Perfect for business meetings or just joining friends to watch the big game, the Green Room is the ideal place to host your next event. To learn more, contact David Crack at 919-232-2477 or email David at nattygreens.com.
So you had studio musician, and then you had orchestrator and composer, and then most of your, later on, most of your credits are music editor. I don't know a lot about the sound or music departments. What's the hierarchy in the music department in that way?
Well, it was interesting. I kind of was a studio player because that's what I knew, as trumpet playing. And then I got out there and discovered music copying. I did a lot of work as a music copyist and an orchestrator. There is a hierarchy. Well, one of the reasons I became a music editor is because I couldn't figure out how composers and producers sort of interfaced.
Okay.
What happens if you're a composer of whatever kind of music and a movie producer comes to you and says, I like your music, I want you to score my movie. How do these people talk to each other? How does composer speak become director speak, and director speak become composer speak?
And you've got to take whatever the music is you write, and then you've got to match it to the beats of the editing and the actions. I've always been amazed at like old cartoons, like old Warner Brothers and Disney cartoons, where the music is following the action and everything. Like somebody starts running, it's like dun 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 dun, and then psh, when they hit something, it's like how do you time that?
Well, that's a job of the guy who stands between the composer and the director producer, the music editor.
Okay.
And the music editor is sort of the Swiss Army knife guy. I mean, anything the composer doesn't want to do and the director doesn't want to do, the music editor's got to do.
Figure out a way to make them work together.
The music editor sits with the director, editor, producer people, and they say, where the guy comes around the corner and he sees the guy with the gun, and then there's this moment, and you got to wait for a beat, and then the thing comes, and he just blah, 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 blah. So you got to go, all right. What I tell the composer is, all right, at a tempo of about 120, about bar 37, beat 3 is when you see the gun, and at bar 42 is when the main character realizes the guy's sneak. So you have to convert, hey, in a beat, in a couple seconds, when you see the guy, you give him a second to think about blah, blah, blah. That becomes, okay, at 118 beats per minute, that's bar 22, beat 3. So it's heavy math.
You got to convert somebody who's thinking in terms of frames to someone who's thinking in terms of bars.
So I have to be the translator between director speak, producer speak, and composer speak.
Oh, man.
Well, the thing is in Hollywood, they understand each other's language, but there has to be somebody in the middle doing all the math.
Because while they know what each other's doing, they're also really busy with their own thing.
So the music editor, after I did a whole stint with Stewart, I ended up working with Michael Dietrich and a guy named Chris McGeary in Final Note Productions. I'm doing a lot of work with them. I realized that because I had this kind of technical, geeky I was a musician, I understood computers, I really delved into time code and frame rates and all this early stuff that nobody had really dealt with in the 90s when everything was going digital. I became pretty valuable as a guy who could translate what composers needed into what producers needed, and what producers needed into what composers needed. So also I realized that when you work on a movie, you work for 6 or 8 weeks, and then you're like laid off for like 6 months until you find another gig.
Right.
If you get a TV gig,
that's ongoing, yeah.
You got 23 episodes. You're going to work for 35 weeks. And if you're an orchestrator, you're only hired at the very end of a project. If you're a copyist, you're hired at the very end of a project. If you're a musician, you're hired for a couple of days. Yeah. But if you're the music editor, you're there from the very first meeting to delivery.
Ah, there you go, steady employment. That's
so
the key.
And my son was born in '92, and my other son was born in '95. So the realization that it's much better to have a 35-week contract than a 3-week contract made a big difference for me.
Cool.
So I got to know lots of people. I worked on a lot of different shows, Warner Brothers. I worked at Disney. I worked on Universal, a lot of independents, all kinds of stuff.
And you did some studio movies too. My favorite of which being Hellboy.
Oh yeah, Hellboy.
I love Hellboy.
Hellboy.
And I like Hellboy 2, and every time Guillermo del Toro announces his next project that isn't Hellboy 3, I get very sad. But
Yeah, Hellboy. Hellboy was interesting.
The way you've discussed it so far as the music editor's job, you know, I was wondering if I was going to ask you
Oh.
if you actually get to see some of the crew and the cast and everything, or if you're just locked away in the studio most of the time. But since you're actually a liaison, as you say, kind of between the composer and the director and everything, so you do get to see people like that. You know, you did get to see Guillermo del Toro and all those people and talk about what they need.
Yeah, you
So you kind of get to see the whole process.
You do see the whole process. Unfortunately, by the time post-production happens, which is music really, the director and the composer may be having discussions during production, but they're not really engaged with the composer until they're in the edit.
So you're not talking so much to the director as you are the editor?
Editor and producer. Director sometimes. I mean, editor, and sometimes editor, producer, director are the same person.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not, sometimes they're two of the...
Kind of Robert Rodriguez,
You
maybe.
just kind of figure out, well, you know, one of the biggest jobs is to figure out who's driving the bus.
Yeah.
Who's driving the bus? Because that's the person you want to listen to. And sometimes that's the #1 challenge.
Yep. In most jobs, that's what you got to figure out. Who's the guy who I really need to be listening to here?
So, yeah, Hellboy, we recorded up at Skywalker Ranch.
Oh, cool.
That was a real interesting session. Big orchestra,
Yeah.
and you know all the theremin stuff. There was that. We actually hired a live guy to come play theremin on that score. A guy from San Francisco.
Now I imagine there aren't 500 people in the union that are professional theremin
players. It couldn't be more than 2 or 3. What was this
Those
guy?
guys get steady work.
Well, I don't know. If you're
Depending on how much you
if
need
you're
it,
doing
I guess.
50s sounding scary movies.
Yeah.
But that was a big project.
That sounds cool. And your last credit on IMDb is Lost.
Right.
As a music editor on Lost.
First
there
2
again,
seasons.
Well, how did you end up transitioning out of that?
I got lost because I was working on a show that was canceled mid-season or early on the season. And then I did a lot of pickup work that year. And the next fall, when TV shows were coming back online, I got a call from for one of the producers on Lost saying that they were redoing the pilot for the first episode, and that they really wanted to kind of punch up the music in that opening scene, and that Michael Giacchino was off working on, gosh, at that time, was it Incredibles or one of those shows?
Say, he's done quite a few
He's done
films.
and he was unavailable to really like rescore the pilot. And I get a phone call. I'm in my car. I'm headed to the valley, you know, to go home. Phone rings. Hello? Hey, we're on, you know, this is producer on Lost. Hey, somebody says, you know, you're the guy to come fix this score. And I'm like, okay, like next week sometime? He said, no, like, can you be here in an hour?
In Hollywood, it seems like when you get a phone call, you got to be ready to
you better
drop
just
stuff.
turn around and go back. So I went in there, I carried a whole stack of CDs that were like drum hits, cymbal smashes, orchestra hits, drones, all kinds of
So you
Swiss
don't get
Army
the luxury of bringing in an orchestra.
No,
or
because
anything.
it was done. I mean, they were having to deliver the pilot. So
Okay.
I took the score that Michael Giacchino had written for the opening of Lost, and I just beefed the heck out of it. I put timpani hits and bass drum hits and rolls and cymbal smashes, and I just turned it into this like big, giant,
Nice. Give it
noisy,
that
loud.
real weight to it.
And you know, I thought it was just like a come in and fix the pilot thing, but I got the gig. You know, I got the show. So I did 2 seasons of that. It was a great show. It was like making a little mini feature every week.
Yeah, the production values on that one were pretty big.
Yeah, and it was a hard show to dub because it was all shot on the beach. It's all shot outdoors, and it was shot all over the country, actually.
And you were working in the studios in LA, right?
Yeah, at a warehouse in Burbank.
Like when you got that gig, were you all excited at first? Were you like, "Yes, I'm going to Hawaii," and they said, "No, you're staying in LA."
I never left the valley. Post-production pretty much happens in nondescript warehouses scattered around Southern California.
Places you wouldn't notice.
You could drive right by and not realize that's where, you know, Lost dubs. I mean, our dub stage was across the street from a McDonald's and down the street from a Home Depot. I mean, you know, nothing.
And yet there's this building with millions of dollars of equipment
millions
in it.
of dollars. Of
all the
equipment.
highest end stuff.
Yeah, and constantly upgrading and newer this and newer that. My very first digital audio show was a 2-channel dub on a TV show back in the early 90s. Lost dubbed on 292 channel systems. So we had almost 400 channels of audio
Holy
available
cow.
on Lost.
And what was the most you ever used?
Well, I got a dozen channels for music. I had about a dozen. If I needed them, I could go as high as 24 channels for music.
Okay.
Sound effects, dialogue, air, ambience. Those guys would use dozens and dozens of channels for all kinds of stuff. I ran into my cousin and his story kind of landed in my lap. I'm like, all right, the stars are aligning. It's kind of time to maybe put the insurance business on the back burner.